Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call the Nash County School Board to order for the work session. First order on the agenda, I need a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
Motion to adopt the agenda.
Second. Need a second, please. You guys hear me? It's been moved by Mr. Lamb, second by Ms. Bullock. Question or discussions? Hearing none, motion that the agenda has been adopted. The first item on the agenda will be the consensus redistricting. Mr. Adam Mitchell, if you come, please.
All right, good afternoon, board members, Dr. Ellis. My name is Adam Mitchell. I'm a lawyer at Tharrington Smith, practice education law, and then every 10 years, I put on a different hat and work with local government entities on redistricting. Also here with me today in the front row there is Bill Gilkison. Bill was a longtime staff member for the legislature, has great experience drawing maps, and he's going to be working with me this round of redistricting and brings a lot of expertise to the process. We can go to the first slide there. So I want to point out, and I know you all know this, but I think it's important just to emphasize and for the public to know that we are not talking about school assignment districts or school redistricting. This has nothing to do with where kids go to school. It is about the election districts that are used by voters to elect you all as board members. And this type of redistricting, it's based on a legal principle. It's a constitutional principle called one person, one vote. And what it means is that the relative voting strength of all voters should be equal. In the case of local governments, we have a little bit of flexibility. It should be close to equal. And if you think about, I'll give an extreme example, a voting district that has 10 voters as opposed to a voting district that has 100 voters. If you're a voter in that smaller 10-person district, you make up 10% of that electorate. And if you get 5 friends to vote together, you have a majority of that district. If the 100-person district, you're only 1%, and you would need 50 people to form a coalition to elect a candidate. And so I guess smaller districts, each voter's relative voting strength is actually smaller than it is in larger districts. And there are 2 factors we need to look out to determine whether or not redistricting is required. The first is that you use true election districts. And what that means is that candidates need to live in a district and only voters from that district elect those candidates. At large, it's certainly a different system. Redistricting is not required. And then something called residency districts, where candidates have to live in a district, but then the voting is the whole jurisdiction. They also don't need to redistrict. But true election districts, which you have, we need to consider redistricting. The second factor we need to look at is, are your current districts out of balance using the 2020 census population? And I mentioned that for local governments, true equality is not required. The flexibility that we are given is plus or minus 5% of the ideal district size. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Before, I'm going to have Bill in just a second come up and talk about this map, but to get to the ideal district size, you take the total number of people in the jurisdiction, you divide it by the number of districts, and that's your ideal district size. And then what we're going to be looking at is the range between 5% below that and 5% above that. Now, if all of your districts fell within that range, you wouldn't need to redistrict for the next 10 years. But as you'll see here, and as Bill can talk about, in just a sec, you are not in that place, although you're not that far out of balance. Some jurisdictions that we work with can have 20, 30, 40% deviations. You're in the plus or minus 10% range. So we have some work to do, but it's not radically out of balance. Bill?
Right. As you can see there, and I hope you can read those percentages on the far right, those are the percentage deviation that each district has from the ideal number. And so you can see that they all have to be within 5% or less than 5% plus or minus percentage. So District 1 and District 4 and District 5 and District 7 and District 10 are all within that range. The other districts are outside that range, so they would have to be changed. And because of the interrelatedness of districts, the ones that are within the range would probably have to be changed too. I mean, it's possible that some of them wouldn't have to be, but there's no guarantee of that. So you have the two districts that are the biggest that need to lose population would be District 2 and District 6. And then the districts that have that need to gain the most population would be District 11 and I believe District 8. So they're going to have to change. What you see here is the map that we pulled from the county website, from the county GIS website, and this shows the districts in color, and then the city limits of the municipalities involved. The biggest one being Rocky Mount, of course, that goes over into Edgecombe County, and then Nashville and Momeyer and so forth. And then we have another map here that shows the same districts, and those are the dark lines there are the precincts. So you can tell that. One thing I should say is that the first map, you could go back to that quickly, and then the second map look a little bit different, and that's because this second map was drawn using the Census Bureau's 2020 census blocks. That's the only thing that we have to use. And the census blocks for the 2020 census were slightly different in some places than the census block for the 2010 census. So I couldn't reproduce that map that's on your website exactly here, but it doesn't, I'll guarantee you that it doesn't make any difference about whether whether you would have to redistrict or not.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we undertake this process. And the law is clear that you, the board, have the authority and really the requirement to redistrict, but it doesn't say a whole lot about how to do it. So this is really a process that we've developed over time. It's what we did here 10 years ago. It's what we've done with other jurisdictions, and it works pretty well, at least in my opinion. So it will all take place in open public meetings like we are here today. There's really no closed session conversations about redistricting. One thing that we feel is very important is that we're not going to have individual conversations with board members outside of these public meetings. Again, we want to make sure everything's transparent, everyone has the opportunity to be heard and that there's no undue influence or no situation where some board members don't know what is being discussed. So that's an important part of our process. In a few minutes, we're going to talk about criteria or guidance, the kinds of things that are important to the board for you to tell us so that Bill can take that into account when he draws your plans. Things like municipalities and the county line, and the shapes of districts and the like. And so we'll be talking about those. We will come back with 3 different plans that meet the criteria as best we can. It's never going to be perfect, and we'll bring those back to you. We will have at least 1 public hearing, and we'll talk in a minute about how that might work. And then eventually we just need to you need to reach consensus about the plan that you as the board prefer. And when you get to that point, we will draft the resolutions that you need, prepare the electronic files to export to the Board of Elections. You'll vote on it, and that will be the plan for the next 10 years. Next slide, please. So timing, your filing period opens early July, I believe. And so the Board of Elections needs some time to upload, import the maps, get everything coded. The public needs some time. Candidates need time to decide or to know what district they're going to be in and if they want to run. So I would say early June would be the latest, and I think we should really shoot for sooner than that. And I think we can do that. We want to get your guidance today on the guidelines and criteria. We plan to come back on March 2nd. We've worked with the chair to just realign the schedule a little bit and present those 3 plans on March 2nd. And then on the 7th, your next regular meeting, we can have some more detailed discussion of those plans. So our goal is to front load a little bit and try to get 3 meetings in the first month so that we can really create some momentum and make sure that you've got time to complete the process. I mentioned this, that you're responsible for it. You don't need any authority or permission. You don't need approval. 10 years ago, we had to get approval from the United States Justice Department. That is no longer the case due to a Supreme Court ruling from a number of years back. All right, so I'm going to pause if that's all right and pass the mic back to the chair in case there are questions. We're going to transition from the introduction and discussion about redistricting, how we're going to do it, take questions, discussion here, and then we'll get into those redistricting criteria in just a moment.
Okay, thank you, Adam. We appreciate that. One of the things that we want to talk about and make sure that this board is really clear on the expectations. We did have a conversation with the Board of Elections director, and they would like to have this as soon as possible. So if we can get this done May or sooner. There are some dates we're looking at, but the superintendent and I, as well as Adam, we looked at it. We want to bring it to the board to bring some type of consensus to the board to try to get this nailed down. As soon as we can get this done, the better off. So that means we'll probably be looking at some special call meetings. We did have to look at revamping our work session in end of this month. 1 day, 2 days later. We normally do it on Monday. We're looking at doing it on Wednesday this time because Adam had pre-engaged situations that he could not be a part of. So it's very important that he's here for those discussions to carry that information. So we're looking at doing our work session on that Wednesday instead of that Monday. So if you guys got any questions for Mr. Mitchell, please feel free to do so. I think when I first came on the board, we were getting our first redistricting. I think people like Mr. Lamb, Mrs. Bullock, and Donna Tavis, and possibly Mr. Silver have been a part of redistricting before from a consensus basis. So basically, one of the things that we want to make sure, and I'm glad you spelled it out, Dr. Ellison, this is a redistricting based on the census. Based on the census. This has nothing to do with the merger, but it's based on the census. the 2020 census.
Correct.
And with that, I'll open the floor for questions.
You said move to work session. You didn't mean the work session. You meant the committee meetings?
Oh, Rod just corrected me. So that's not the work sessions, committee meetings that we do on the first Monday. So that's the work, not the work session, but the committee meetings that we do the last month of each month. Yes, sir.
Just a real quick question. Obviously, having never been through this before, you said you worked with other districts and worked with us previously. Is the number of seats ever part of this discussion, or is that not even part of the decision we made to handle us?
Correct. Yeah, the number of seats is the General Assembly, and it's typically established in local legislation. So my perspective is that we need to work with the districts as they are now. And if the board wished to address that issue, it would be through another process.
Unrelated question, but
Go ahead.
one of the things you had mentioned, I think it's kind of geographical areas or areas of distinctions.
Mhm.
One of them is schools. I feel like we're in an area where we have districts that have 7 schools.
Mhm.
Is that something to look at?
It can,
It's out of our hands as to the geographic.
right. It can be. We have had school district clients ask us to try to balance the number of high school. Wake County, for example, which has so many schools, they asked us to try to approximately balance the number of high schools per district. So that's certainly guidance that you can give and that we can consider. Now, and when we talk about criteria, you can start to see as we go through it how there can certainly be some tension between so like precinct lines, for example. Precinct lines, it's great to respect precinct lines whenever we can. It makes for more orderly elections. It means that everybody who goes to vote at a certain location is going to have the same ballot, at least for school board. They may have different ballots for other. So we certainly tried to do that. We don't have to, and sometimes we need to split precincts, and we may for you, but so if you kind of combine, if you think about that on the one hand, and then you think about the number of schools on the other hand, you can see how there may be some tension between those two. So,
Yeah.
but yes, that is a very appropriate criteria for us to consider.
Can we ask that people speak into the mic, because it's very hard to understand what is being said? And I did not understand what Lank was asking. So could you ask that question again?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Evelyn, I didn't have my mic on. My first question was just about, is it part of our responsibility to look at the number of seats? And the second part was, does the number of schools within a certain district come into play as part of those decisions?
Okay, thank you. I have a question as well. And that question is about the timeline. Is it possible that we could have this completed by mid-April at least, so that people who are planning to run would have additional time to make that decision, feel the climate, and make their decision before our filing time in July?
I think it's possible. I think there are going to be two primary factors that are going to come into the timeline. One is the board's response and reaction to our plans, and does a consensus begin to emerge fairly quickly, or do you say we can't stand any of them, go back and draw another? Hopefully that's not the case. And then the second is public engagement, public hearing, and how you want to run that process. It can be as simple as having a single public hearing once you have a preferred plan but haven't voted to adopt it. It can be a single public hearing once we present the 3 plans. on all three. Or some folks like to have a more robust process where there are community meetings and the like. And so the timeline's really going to depend on those two factors. But I do think it's possible.
Can I ask the board then, with the timeline, if we as a board could plan to have our proposed maps by March, the end of March, and then we plan to have however many community meetings we agree to have, and have that completed at least by mid-April, and then towards the end of April, if we possibly can, finalize the maps. Would that timeline work, Mr. Chair?
Ms. Bullock, we have been in communications with Adam and his team, as well as Dr. Ellis, to try to put together a schedule for that. And we've been, as Adam said initially, we've been very aggressive trying to get there. That's why we moved his next meeting to present to the board. And I think the 7th or what day is
Second.
the 2nd,
The
Ms. Bullock?
second, we will have 3 plans. Again, assuming we get your guidance on the criteria today, we will have 3 plans on March the 2nd. And then our thought was to come back on the 7th. And when we give you those plans, there's going to be a lot to digest. There are going to be maps. There's going to be criteria. There's going to be data. And so our thought was to get them to you on the 2nd, give you a few days to digest them, then come back on the 7th, discuss it in more depth, and try to, at that point, reach consensus, at least about how to move forward from there. But we can also, if you want to decide, and I think one key decision point is, do you want your public hearing to be towards the beginning of the process when there are 3 plans, or closer to the end of the process where you sort of narrowed things down? And I think there are reasons for both. And we can decide that today, or we can decide that when we bring the plans back on the 7th.
I think that would, the chair recognizes Mr. Silva.
Sure.
You as well.
I apologize for being late.
Mr. Silva, I'm sorry, could you talk into a mic, please?
Thank you.
I'm slow.
Hi there.
Can you brief synopsis without going back to all that you said? Kind of bring me up. I've had a family emergency. I apologize for being late. Can you repeat just a small portion of what you've talked about thus far to kind of bring me up without repeating everything? Of synopsis, please.
Sure.
Please.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
we're talking about redistricting based on the 2020 census.
Okay.
Redistricting is required if you use election districts, which you do, and if your current districts, looking at the 2020 census population, are out of a plus or minus 5% range.
Okay.
That's the acceptable range. You are out of that range, although not grossly out of that range. You've got a couple districts that are about 10% above ideal and a couple that are about 10% below. We've got to get them into that plus or minus 5% range. And then we just talked a little bit about the press going to happen in open session. We don't have individual conversations offline with board members. And then we really just started talking about timing and process just a minute or two ago. So that's a very brief synopsis.
Gotcha. That's good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Anyone else? But just to go back to you, Ms. Bullock, we will aggressively try to expedite this process. I have had conversation with Mr. Kearney for the Board of Elections. Assure him we will expedite this to get them that information as soon as possible, so people will have the opportunities to put their names in the process for the elections coming up.
All
I
right,
have
why
one
don't
more
Yes, ma'am.
The maps, Adam, that you will be bringing, will you bring a copy of a paper map for us that represents our district so that we can look at that district in detail? I know in the past, we received maps and we really couldn't tell very much about it. And so we asked the demographer to enlarge the map so that we could see the detail and streets. Will your maps have that information for us?
So we've developed a tool this cycle that we call an interactive map. It's electronic, and I can come back to paper maps, but the way that it works is that you go to a website, we'll give you the website, it'll show a blank, you'll see the jurisdiction, but blank, and then there'll be a little table on the left, and there'll be tabs, and so it'll say current districts, and you can click on that, and it'll overlay the current districts on the map. And then you can unclick that, and option A that we bring you, that'll be loaded, and you can show that. And you can zoom in to the very, very fine street detail. And you can also, there's a tool that lets you put an address in, and it'll then zoom into that address. And so then you can quickly cycle through plan A, this address is here, plan B, this address is here. So I think that gives you the level of detail that you will need. If we can certainly arrange to have paper maps made, and that's something that sometimes happens when we get to the public hearing or a forum where we get a few up around the room, but that's how we've been handling that.
Okay, thank you. That works.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Silver?
I would like to ask Ms. Bullock if she would kindly submit what she mentioned earlier to our board chair for consideration. You said some great things earlier, and I was trying to memorize all that you said, the timeline stuff. I think it's good. I think to have those things, Mr. Chair, having those would be good for consideration. Would you please submit those to our chair?
Mr. Silver?
Yes.
I'm going to ask that where as you speak, you maintain your mask, please.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
Yep.
What are you talking about? If I might ask, Mr. Chair, are you referring to the timeline I suggested?
Yes. Yes, I am.
If he desires that, I don't mind.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bullock. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, if let's go ahead and dig into their criteria a little bit, and then there certainly can be more time for discussion and questions. And so we're going to divide the criteria up into a couple of different buckets. The first are required, and so there's not really a whole lot we need to think about here. So there's population equality within plus or minus 5%. We're going to make sure we comply with the Voting Rights Act. And then we're going to make sure your districts are contiguous, that they're not going to be islands in the middle of another district that go with the district over here.
Okay.
So those are required. This next set is the ones that are real clear up or down, yes, no sort of questions that we need your guidance on ideally today. So the first has to do with your current plan. And the question is, do we start from your current plan and then make changes to get to population equality? Or do we go with what we call the clean slate approach, which is to start from scratch and to build a map from the ground up? Now, I will say that starting from the current district is definitely the majority view. That's typically what we get asked, and there's some good reasons for that. I think your districts also, as I said, a number of them are actually within plus or minus 5%. So we don't necessarily need to do a sort of clean slate approach, but that's something that we want your feedback on. The second is the question of incumbents. And so the two approaches are, we get all of your home addresses and we put them into the redistricting software. And then we make sure that two of you are not ever in a district together, sometimes referred to as double bunking. I would say that the majority view, again, is to do that, to avoid putting incumbents in the same district. There can be some problems with that with staggered elections. You can have periods of time where arguably a district doesn't have any representative, but we can do it either way. And if you say, don't look at incumbency, we won't look up your home addresses, we won't know them, and we won't consider that obviously for the redistricting. The third point, what we're getting at here is, are there parts of your jurisdiction that you know are growing quickly, and are there parts that you know are growing less quickly? And what we can do, and I want to be clear, this is not required, but if there are those growth patterns that are fairly consistent, we still have to stay within plus or minus 5%, but we can take your fast growing areas and put them to the bottom of the range. We can take your slower growing areas and put them at the top of the range, with the idea that over the 10 years, we're going to hopefully stay closer to being in balance. Strictly optional. I would say there's not really a majority view on that. Some people love it. Some people say, why, well, it's not required. We don't need to do that, or we don't know where the growth is going to be. So something to consider. We can go to the next slide. These next set are sort of softer, less up or down. So the first has to do with administrative areas, precincts, municipalities, business districts. In your case, and obviously this is unusual, there's the county line. Do you want us to limit or expand the number of districts that cross the county line? I believe currently there's 3. Is that something that's important to you all, something to consider? Communities of interest, neighborhoods, cultural groups, other areas. One example I can give you, a county we worked with had it was like a mill district historic area that was listed, I think, on the National Register of Historic Places. They said, we don't want you to divide this. So we didn't divide it. Just an example. Major physical features, major roads, railroad tracks, water bodies. We prefer to use things like that, obviously, rather than cutting a neighborhood in half. So, unless you were to tell us not to do that or to really focus on one or the other, that's something we would consider. And then compactness. You all have a complicated jurisdiction in a lot of districts, so you don't have very compact districts. It's not required, but I think we certainly will try to make the districts as reasonably compact as we can while following the other criteria. All right, so if we can go back a slide, I'm going to just suggest that we start with this list right here and try to come to consensus on these first 3. And then we can talk about the next list, the softer features. And if we can get clear guidance from you all on how you want us to draw these districts, we should be in good shape to come back with plans.
Okay, so with that said, Adam, I think what we'll do to sort of expedite this process, we'll go around the table, starting with Ms. Bullock. I think, who else do we have online? Any other board members online? So Ms. Bullock, we'll start with you as far as those 3 items. Just share with us what your thoughts are with that and how would you like to proceed? Let me just say this too. If we can sort of keep that to a minimum time frame, recognize that we do have others we need to go into a session as well.
I think those 3 that are listed, I would be in favor of.
So I'm going to ask the board clerk if she can sort of keep track of that for me, please.
And so just to make sure, I think I do understand, Ms. Bullock, you're saying start from current districts, don't pair incumbents, and do try to take into account future growth.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
that's exactly what I mean.
Thank you. So who else we got online? Ms. Sharonda?
Yes, I'm here. I would say the exact same thing. I agree with Ms. Bullock.
Thank you. Mr. Jenkins?
I caught the tail end of this bill, so I want to look at the slides a little closer.
All right, we'll come back to you. Mr. Edwards? Mr. Bissett? You're muted. I can't hear you.
Said, I'm sorry, I just logged on, so I've missed everything you said.
All right. So who else we have? Mr. Silver? These three suit my fancy. Mr. Lamb?
Whatever you used last time, it worked last time pretty well. I think it needs to continue. We had a harmless process.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Mr. Lang?
Yeah, of these three, I mean, just to kind of, I guess, rate them, I think the first two would be wonderful. I mean, I'd certainly put priority there. The third one, yeah, I mean, I think there is a change in our economic or our population here in the county that probably needs to be addressed, because if you look at kind of the southern end of the county, the western end of the county, that's where your +10s are. That's where you're in the city of Rocky Mount and into Edgecombe, I think is where you see the negative, the drops. So I don't know. I think that will continue, but I don't know how close you can maybe get compared to how we can take a look at those other things. The one thing I had, and if this is out of place, I'll take it back. But you had mentioned first thing, this is not due to
Demerger, right?
Demerger, but that is part of where we are. I mean, I know you can't plan for something that isn't happening, but I think, are we not back in this in this room again?
Yeah, you're gonna be back regardless. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, you can't. Why is what you talking? I can't imagine that you could redistrict now that will account for that.
Right. Yeah, if the boundaries of the jurisdiction changed, you would need to do it again.
So that's one of the reasons, Mr. Dunn, that we said this is a consensus from the Census Bureau, the redistricting.
Yeah.
So just be mindful of that. And I too I like those top three items that we maintain and stay with that. I agree with Mr. Lamb. If it won't broke, we did a nice job last time we're doing, let's keep maintaining that.
Well, I don't know that you did the third bullet last time.
Well,
You
that's fine,
probably
but-
didn't.
Right.
But I
Yes.
think it's a good addition. I think it's a good addition because I think what Mr. Dunn was referring to, we're gonna see growth. So we need to plan for those growth.
But if we're
I'm
gonna
just
have to
having
come back
two
and
different things to say.
we're gonna have
what we
to come back
did
and
last
get Bill,
is not
we haven't seen.
Right.
I'm just
the
trying to
growth.
be clear that if you're trying to look at each of these individually, your vote to say do what you did last time is saying. don't
Well,
do
let's
this.
put it like this. We're gonna maintain the three that you said. Ms. Washington,
I support the 3 criteria.
okay? Ricky, any comments before we move on?
Yeah. I think it was Lang that mentioned, or either Franklin mentioned about the population. Are they going to look at GFI and see who has permits and everything to build subdivisions in the southern part of the county as well as up here around Northern Nash? Because I understand right around Northern Nash is about 600 homes getting ready to be built. And the second thing is why are we doing this, not considering demerger, when Edgecombe County's already proceeded in hiring some people for this situation? Are we paying them twice to do this?
Let me just interject on that one. Mr. Jenkins, this is not about the merger. We're not here to discuss the merger. We're to discuss the 20 census. So that's what the discussion will be on, the 20 census, which is required by legislation for us to do. And we have to get this done before before June for the election process to begin. So it's all about, it has nothing to do with the merger. So we're not going to interject the merger in this process.
I understand that, but it's part of the process, it's legislation, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, just to clarify, you will, if you're demerged, you would not be demerged before this upcoming election.
So you have to do this for the upcoming election, kind of
Right.
regardless of what happens after that. Demerger between now and July is simply not an option within the current statutory framework that's in existence. So this has to happen, and yes, you may have to do it twice, but that's the cost of, one of the costs of demerger if it occurs.
So that was,
I just don't want kids to be moved from one school this year and then turn around and be moved again in a year or so.
Okay, so
That's my concern.
okay, so
Mr. Jenkins, we're not talking about school redistricting at all. So this has nothing to do with where kids go to school. It's
Okay.
just voting districts. I do want to address your first point because, and I think you're getting at the taking into account future growth. And if there is consensus to do that, that does raise the question of, well, who should we talk to learn about that? Like if we were working with the county, they have a planning department. So do you want us to work with the county planning department, or do you all have student assignment staff that follows growth patterns? Because I think
Lang,
Yeah, I know our county planning board is having to take a serious look at the southern end of the county and what had been allotted for lots is being changed now because of the growth. And I think they're already seeing they need to stem some of that. So I would imagine if you can reach out to the county planning board, they're going to have a lot of information as to what the next 10 years is going to look
so
like.
I thank you, Mr. Duncan, because I'm under the impression that the third bullet point, that you would take the lead to work with the planning board that Lang just mentioned to come up with those numbers.
we can do that. Yeah, we can do that.
As well as the city planning board.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I think I misspoke and I would like to clear that up. When the question was asked whether we took this into consideration when we did the maps in 2010, and I said I thought we did. I think I got the two redistrictings confused. We did not do it when we were redistricting because of the 2010 census, but we did use that information when we were redistricting the system, the students. We used that information at that time. So I don't know that we actually would be doing a good thing if we use that now to draw our maps, because we don't know how many people would be in the families that move into this population growth, which would skew our numbers yet again. Is that not correct, Adam?
Well, so with estimates and projections, they're just estimates and projections. And so I think it's a combination of looking at what the last 10 years have been and then getting some data. But there's no way we are going to know for certain what growth looks like over 10 years. It's not possible. And I want to, it is correct that 10 years ago, we did not consider future growth. That was not something, we just weren't doing it then, to be honest. Yeah, it was not part of it.
Yeah. And with that being talked about, I would change my position and I would be okay with 1 and 2, but not with 3 for that reason. And as Frank just said, I think the process we used and the things we considered during our last census served us quite well. And I would be in favor of continuing using the criteria that we used with our last one, with 2010, rather than using the population for now.
Any other discussions? So Adam, if I may ask, is it possible for you to bring a showing with and without .3?
You want 6 minutes?
Well, do you mean one that shows or tries to account for future growth,
Right.
or two, and then one or two that does not?
That's right.
Yeah, we can do that.
And see how it balances out.
Can do that. All right, if we can, and I'm trying to keep, I know you all have time limitations, and so if I'm moving too fast, let me know. But if we can go to the next slide. These are more specific county line, precincts, neighborhoods. Are there things about your community and your district that you want us to know as we redraw these lines for you?
First one, preserving the administration areas impact. Any objections to that? You good with that, Adam? Number 2, preserving community interests. Anything that anyone has any comments or recommendations for that?
I mean, Bill, I've never done this.
I haven't
I'm
either.
not going to know it until
I
I
won't-
see it.
yeah.
And we can, I mean, I would love as much information as we can get as we put these maps together, but I would imagine there's some retooling once we see those options.
But like Bill, if you're saying to do number 1, and who's gonna, I mean, they need some direction as to like what you consider to be number 1.
Correct.
So, I mean,
Did
it's
we-
not just,
Did we
do
take
you
that
want
in,
them, do you want them?
did we take that in consideration last time we did this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Okay,
number 1 addresses the issue that we don't split precincts or certain districts.
Correct. And do you want,
And we did take that into consideration. We did preserve the precincts and the business districts as much as we possibly could. And so, yeah, that's exactly what we did last time. In fact, each of those, if I could say, because I've been through this 2 times, and I'm not trying to say that I know it all, but I do know that when we went through this, we took these into consideration. And I do know that we did our best to preserve communities, and we did our best not to split precincts, and we did our best to look at boundaries, natural boundaries. I do know we did all of that at the last time we did redistricting.
so I think what we will, and I'm gonna go back to what Mr. Dunton said, that says this first one going through. So we're gonna rely on, I see Ms. Chavis is here as well.
Yes, and Ms. Bullock made a very valid point.
You need a microphone. I know they're not going to be able to hear.
No, you're not interrupting. If you
Ms.
can
Bullock
maintain-
had a
if you
very
maintain-
valid,
Miss, I'm sorry, Ms. Chavis, could you maintain
Right.
your mask? Thank you.
that's right. She had a very valid point. We did look at the neighborhoods, and we found out through our forums a lot of times, things like a street that ended in the neighborhood, the parents could help us a lot in making sure those neighborhoods had some cohesion.
Yes, ma'am.
They knew how it worked from the neighborhood standpoint, where a lot of times we did not. And we had some lines that one side of the street went one way and the other side the other. And some of those things did make sense that we could adjust, but we did not know, like you said, until we got into it. So I think we definitely want to give that some thought as we do this.
So you maintain that mic, Ms. Chavis, because we're gonna call on you as well.
I'm coming up now.
I had a couple of things I wanted to say.
Let's see, one of them has to do with precincts. Often your boards of elections have opinions about precincts. So they would prefer that you not split precincts, or that you minimize the splitting of precincts, because it confuses the voters
It
if they're
does.
split a lot. And in some cases, it makes it harder, in a lot of cases, it makes it harder for the elections to be conducted. And might even in some instances compromise the secrecy of the ballot. But that's just something that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to ask about at some point is if you could give some guidance about, I noticed that, as Adam mentioned, the Edgecombe side of the district contains 3 districts. And I wonder if that appears to have been done deliberately 10 years ago. I'm wondering if that's something you all still want. If you could give some kind of guidance about that would be helpful.
Floor is open for discussion regarding that.
I can help you a little bit with that as to the reason, if you would like.
Yes, ma'am.
The reason for that is that without, we try to make all of the districts comparable so that we didn't have 3 all-Black districts. We tried to incorporate so that each of us would have some minority voters as well as majority voters. We knew that because of the where some districts were, that we would not be able to keep them 50-50. But that was our goal, trying to make sure that our districts really looked like the whole. And that's the reason we have Edgecombe in 3 different districts rather than pack them in one.
And I would say that you've given guidance to start from your current districts. And so I'm not hearing a push to take that 3 down to 1 or to 2. And so I'm inclined that we'll work from what you have,
Right.
and see where we wind up. So what I'm hearing so far is we're going to start from the current districts. We're not going to double bunk incumbents. We're going to bring one plan that accounts for future growth and 2 that don't, or do I have that reversed?
Yeah, and that's just my thoughts. I don't know what the board thoughts is behind that. And just from the point of just looking at it for a presentation.
I like the 2 and the 1 that reflects future growth rather than 2 reflecting future growth.
Okay. And then if we can go back to the slide that has the longer list. So I'm hearing interest in keeping precincts whole. We've talked about the county line. We will, for the smaller municipalities at least, we will try not to divide them. I think I've heard that. I haven't heard real specific information about communities of interest, but that may just be something that develops and comes out over time, is what I'm hearing. And yes, we will follow major physical features. I think that is the feedback that I have heard. And if that is accurate, then we're good with that. That we have what we need to work with.
Should the board members get the chair communities of interest if they exist in the coming days that he could forward to you, maybe?
That would be fine.
All right, so if there's anyone who has community or points of community interest, would forward that to me, I will forward it to Adam.
Unless there's anything else, we'll be back on March 2nd with 3 plans that wrestle with these various criteria, and we'll see where we wind up.
Good luck.
Okay, before you go, can
Okay.
you get a consensus from the board to move that meeting? Because right now the meeting is on whatever that date is.
Okay, so what we've gotten is actually, we typically have our work session on the first or the last Monday of the month, which is, what's Monday?
28th of
No.
February. 28th.
28th of February. And is it here?
We want to move it to the 2nd. Is that right?
Correct.
March?
That's what you.
Right. So we're looking at moving it from that Monday to that Wednesday for Adam to make a presentation and bring this to the full board. Any objections to that?
We're gonna stay at 4 o'clock.
Yes, at 5 o'clock. We start at 5. Don't we start at 5?
But now, are you talking about the work session or the committee meeting?
The committee meetings,
Okay,
committee meeting.
They started at 4.
right, they started at 4.
Okay, so that committee meeting starts at 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
All right, I think Bill wants to.
If I could say one thing quickly, if someone, the superintendent or whoever could get me a list of the residence addresses of all the members, as soon as you can, that would be great. I mean, obviously, the PO box.
So I will ask,
Board.
yeah, the board clerk, Sarita, if you could get that to, Bill, Mr. Bill. She'll work with you on that and give you that information. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, that was 5 o'clock, I'm sorry, 5 o'clock for the committee meeting start at 5, policy starts at 5, not 4.
Okay,
And I corrected that with that.
okay. All right, thank
The
you.
invite I got from the system is 4.
It needs to be. Have we changed
I mean,
it?
the
One
invite-
policy at 4.
Yeah, the invites that I get say 4 o'clock.
The policy committee meets at 5.
Thought so.
Once we changed the 2 separate dates, they all started at 5.
Yes.
That's right. So I think if we need to start at 4 o'clock, because it's, and I don't know, we can change that if we need to.
We need to start at 5 because
You mean
we have
just for
people
this?
working. That's why we
Okay,
started.
that's fine. That's fine. I'm good with that. So 5 o'clock on the
28th,
tw-
I'm sorry.
Second. March 2nd, 5
March
o'clock.
2nd.
Mr. Chair, I will not be there on the 2nd.
Thank you, sir.
He doesn't have to be here at 5. If Paul, what time will you get to this?
We were just gonna let him start first.
Start
Oh,
and
then do
then
that
everything else after.
Yeah, we,
Because we were
Got
trying
it,
to
March 2nd
accommodate his
time.
Right, okay.
business.
all right.
If people are gonna.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is closed session. I need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I make the motion, we go into closed session pursuant to General Statute 143-318, 11A1, A3, and A6, prevent the disclosure of confidential personnel files on GS 115C321. To consider matters relating to initial employment of an individual employee, to prevent the disclosure of confidential student records under GS 115C-402, and to consult with the board's attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege, including a discussion of bond forfeiture matter in State versus Willis, 17 CRS 5476C.
Any second?
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Silver. All those in favor? Any opposed? So moved. Work session's closed. We'll go into closed.